U.S. corn and soybean futures have fallen sharply following USDA's most recent crop record. In its initial look at the 2023 production situation, USDA projected record U.S. corn and soybean yields. Silos are overflowing, corn is rotting, and farmers are standing in empty fields staring at crops no one wants to buy. In just days, 88% of U.S. corn exports disappeared, wiped out by a trade war that slammed the door on decades of global partnerships. China walked away, other buyers followed, and now entire farming towns are unraveling. How did a country that once fed the world end up on the brink of an agricultural collapse? I'm old enough to remember when soybeans were an alternative crop that a few people were playing with back in the 1960s. Soybeans have become an important crop in the heart of America. Something feels deeply wrong. Across the Midwest, places like Iowa, Nebraska, and Illinois, you can find massive silos filled to the brim with corn and soybeans. These crops were supposed to feed the world, keep the economy moving, and pay the bills for thousands of hardworking families. But they're just sitting there unbought, unshipped, and used. In some cases, they're starting to rot. And it's not because of a bad harvest or a natural disaster. It's because of a system that failed the very people who trusted it. Farmers planned, planted, and harvested just like they've done for generations. But this time, there's no one at the other end of the line. Export contracts have vanished. Countries like China, once the biggest buyer of US soy and corn, have completely cut off purchases in 2025. The barns are full, but the bank accounts are empty, and the phones aren't ringing with orders. Here's how soybeans became such a valuable commodity. From food production to the US economy and geopolitics. This isn't a weather problem. It's not about pests or floods or droughts. This is something entirely different. This is man-made. The collapse in US exports came almost overnight, driven by trade wars, political pride, and massive tariffs that spiraled out of control. When the US slapped a 145% tariff on Chinese goods, China answered back with a 125% tariff on US agricultural products. That single blow knocked out decades of trading trust. Buyers in China canceled their orders. Then they signed long-term deals with Brazil and Argentina. Countries that once relied on American grain are now doing business elsewhere, and they might not come back. And now they're concerned about how President Trump's campaign promise to launch the largest deportation effort in American history will play out. What makes it worse is that all of this could have been avoided. The trade war was supposed to help American industry, but instead it crushed the backbone of the rural economy. These farmers aren't asking for handouts. They're asking for the chance to sell what they've worked so hard to grow. They feel like pawns in a game where the rules keep changing and no one tells them why. You hear stories that break your heart. A farmer in Nebraska sold his tractor, not to upgrade, but just to buy food for his family. In Iowa, people are choosing not to plant this season. Not because they don't want to work, but because they don't know if there will be a buyer come harvest time. And that's terrifying. You can work all year and still lose everything because of decisions made in Washington or Beijing. The crops in the silos are more than just grain. They represent time, energy, sweat, and sacrifice. They're the result of early mornings, long nights, and the hope that what you're growing has value. Watching them sit and rot while no one buys and no one helps is a quiet kind of devastation. It's the kind that doesn't make the evening news, but leaves entire towns wondering if their way of life has been permanently changed. This isn't just about corn and soybeans. It's about what happens when the people who feed the country are forgotten. The 2018 trade dispute showcased how relying on a single market for its exports is a risk. Farming is a high-risk business, and we don't want all of our beans in one basket with China. Something historic has happened in 2025. And if you're a farmer or connected to the agriculture industry in any way, you can feel the weight of it. China, the #1 buyer of US corn, soybeans, and wheat for decades, hasn't bought a single grain from the United States this year. Zero. The silence from one of the biggest markets on the planet has been deafening. Instead, China has taken its business elsewhere. Brazil, Argentina, and even Canada have now taken the lead as China's new preferred suppliers. These are not temporary deals either. They're long-term contracts that stretch across multiple seasons. The kind of agreements that used to be secured with American farmers, relationships that took years to build have been torn apart in just days. It's like watching a trusted partner walk away without even looking back. In the vast expanses of America's Midwest, a tragedy is unfolding, not born of drought or blight, but of politics gone awry. The US-China trade war has unleashed a tempest upon the nation's farmers, tearing at the roots of a way of life that has sustained generations. This is no mere economic hiccup. It is a seismic rupture in the foundation of rural America, threatening to bury its legacy beneath the weight of unsold crops and broken promises. The conflict erupted with the US imposing a staggering 145% tariff on Chinese goods, a move heralded as a triumph for American strength. Yet China's retaliation was swift and merciless, a 125% tariff on US agricultural staples like corn, soybeans, pork, and wheat. Overnight, American crops became prohibitively expensive, and Chinese buyers, once a cornerstone of the market, vanished. Ports fell silent, shipments were abandoned, and barns swelled with harvests no one would buy. The economic fallout is stark. Soybean futures have plummeted below $12 per bushel from a 2022 peak near $14, while cash corn prices soar at premiums as storage costs quadruple. Beyond the numbers lies a deeper wound. Farmers, who rose before dawn to feed the world, now face a betrayal that cuts to the core. Washington promised protection, a shield against foreign rivals. Instead, it delivered devastation. The tariffs, meant to punish competitors, have turned inward, driving up costs for machinery, seeds, and fertilizer. Some farmers sell their tractors, not for progress, but survival, while others let crops rot in the fields, too costly to harvest. This is economic carnage, man-made and relentless, stripping away not just livelihoods, but legacies. The ripple effects are suffocating rural communities. Grain elevators brim with unsold yield, feed stores falter, and diners grow quiet. Banks, sensing the peril, withhold loans, strangling the agricultural cycle. As China pivots to Brazil for imports, the US risks ceding its global dominance, a loss that could echo for decades. Fields stand empty not from failure of the land, but from fear. Why plant when buyers are gone? Politicians tout resilience from afar, but the reality is grim. Farmers feel abandoned, caught in a war they never chose. This is no temporary storm, it's a reckoning. Can American agriculture endure this self-inflicted wound? The answer hangs in the balance as the sun sets on a harvest of despair. Across the vast plains of rural America, a storm brews not of wind or rain, but of desperation and defiance. Farmers, once the silent backbone of a nation, now stand before courthouses, clutching signs that scream, "Don't trade our farms away." These are not mere protests. They are cries from a way of life teetering on the edge of extinction. In 12 states, lawsuits have been filed against the Trump administration, charging misuse of emergency powers to impose tariffs without congressional consent. The accusation cuts deep. Hasty policies unleashed chaos, not protection, and the casualties are not distant corporations, but the very fields that once fed the world. The numbers paint a grim picture. A 7% decline in farms from 2017 to 2022, erasing 142,000 agricultural lifelines. Yet, the devastation stretches far beyond American soil, igniting a global food security crisis. In Nigeria and nations alike, where US grain anchored affordable diets, markets now tremble under surging prices and vanishing supplies. Bread, oil, and feed, essentials of survival, slip beyond reach, forcing families to ration hope alongside meals. The collapse of US exports has triggered a desperate scramble, with Brazil and Argentina buckling under demand they cannot fully meet. China's voracious appetite intensifies the strain, leaving poorer countries to claw for scraps in a merciless global race. This is no simple economic hiccup. It is a political unraveling, exposing a labyrinth of trade decisions where rural voices were drowned out. Tariffs, sold as shields for American farmers, instead sparked a trade war that torched their markets. In towns where tractors once hummed, silence now reigns, broken only by the rustle of legal briefs passed hand to hand, a faint glimmer of resistance. Meanwhile, mental health lines buzz with calls from those staring down empty silos and emptier futures. Communities fray as homes empty, schools shrink, and churches echo with the absence of the faithful. The question looms, heavy and unanswered. Could wiser, measured steps have spared this wreckage? As courts deliberate and policymakers debate, the fallout accelerates, auctioned farms, shattered lives, and a world left hungry. What began in Washington's corridors now starves Lagos streets, a stark reminder: when the breadbasket falters, the globe trembles. How long until the pleas of the desperate pierce the halls of power? The global food system, a fragile tapestry woven from decades of trust and trade, now frays at its seams. The abrupt collapse of U.S. grain exports, corn and soybeans once destined to feed nations, has unleashed a crisis that transcends borders. In 2025, the U.S., long the world's breadbasket, saw 88% of its corn exports vanish overnight, a casualty of the U.S.-China trade war. Tariffs, 145% from Washington, 125% from Beijing, slammed shut a market that American farmers depended on, replacing abundance with desolation. China, once the top buyer, turned to Brazil and Argentina, signing long-term deals that may never swing back. This is not a fleeting disruption. It is a tectonic shift, threatening the livelihoods of millions and the stability of global food security. In America's heartland, Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, silos brim with unsold crops, some rotting in the sun. Farmers who planned and toiled with the faith that markets would hold now face betrayal. A Nebraska grower sells his tractor not for progress, but to stave off hunger. An Iowa family skips planting, fearing another harvest with no buyers. These are not just economic losses, they are wounds to a way of life. Rural towns unravel as grain elevators idle, feed stores shutter, and banks tighten credit, choking the agricultural cycle. The promise of protectionism, heralded by politicians, has morphed into a punishing irony. Tariffs meant to shield farmers have instead crushed them. Globally, the fallout is dire. In Nigeria, where U.S. corn once kept food affordable, prices soar, deepening poverty's bite. Brazil and Argentina, thrust into the breach, strained to meet demand, their fields unable to fully compensate. China's pivot tightens the squeeze, leaving weaker nations scrambling. This man-made crisis, born of political pride and miscalculation, exposes the food system's fragility. Lawsuits pile up in 12 U.S. states, farmers decrying a government that traded their futures away, but legal battles offer cold comfort against empty barns. Restoring trade is no luxury, it's survival. The cost of inaction mounts in shuttered farms, hollowed communities, and a world edging toward hunger. History will judge those who let this lifeline snap. The clock ticks and the silence from the fields grows louder.